professors in, let's say, London or Boston or New York, and the prism is always their interest. So the prism of domestic interest is almost never used by us in academics, or I'm sorry to say by us in the government, or by us in the professions. It's always an external prism through which policy gets formulated. Mr. Modi, for reasons that Dr. Swami has exemplified, has got a truly Indian prism through which he looks at things, and which is why there's every expectation that the kind of decision making that he takes is going to be very different from the kind of decision making that has been made by people, and I put myself in that category, may not be Swapan. A lot of us, the category of taking decisions are not entirely related to the ground reality of our country. Some small examples. The Congress Party spoke about handouts. That look, we'll give you a handout. It's like if a beggar comes to you in your car window, you tell the beggar, I'm not going to give you 1 rupee, I'll give you 5 rupees. Or I'll give you 10 rupees as a special gift. But he's still a beggar. And you're still the person giving him that gift. Of course, a different matter, the gift comes from the taxpayer. It doesn't come from the personal pockets of those who are giving the gift. But in Mr. Modi's vision, India is an aspirational country. You're not talking in terms of giving handouts, you're talking in terms of basically aspiring to get incomes yourself that can enable you to give gifts to others rather than take gifts from other people. In other words, a self-confident India, a self-confident people. And for a long time, we have had politicians tell us how insecure we should be, that how we always will fight each other, how Hindus and Muslims hate each other, how North and South Indians fight each other, how we are completely divided. I think the same kind of thing takes place in Sri Lanka also. And we have been conditioned to have a kind of insecurity about ourselves and about our societies, when what is needed is the security of realizing that our brain power, our human capacity is at least as good as anything in the world. I'd like to say this because I've taught at universities across the globe. I've taught in Europe, I've taught in the United States, I've taught in China, and I've taught in South Asia. I don't believe the human material in South Asia is in any way below that of the human material in any other part of the world. So that self-confidence is what Mr. Modi says, you are Indian, you can do well. And may I say that Indians have proved this. Unfortunately, not in India, but outside India. Now, you go to London, you go to New York, you go to Boston and Colombo, you go anywhere, you find the Indian community doing exceptionally well. And the reason is that the systems in place, the kind of logistics in place, the kind of decision-making apparatus that they are in touch with is much more conducive to innovation and enterprise than the system has been in India. And the reason for that is quite simple. We talk in terms of Prime Minister Nehru bringing democracy to the country. It's a different matter that Prime Minister Nehru formulated economic policy, social policy, and foreign policy with the help of only one person, that is namely himself. He worked all these important policies out basically by himself, and consulting those whom he knew agreed with him. And this was, of course, a very democratic way of getting decisions taken and getting policies formulated. But more importantly, what happened was, after 1947, our flag changed. Our national anthem, of course, was different. But the laws remained the same. The administrative processes and procedures remained the same. And the laws were colonial laws which gave immense authority to the state. Now, since then, no politician in office wants to change those laws for the simple reason that politicians and officials benefit hugely from colonial laws that give immense authority to the government and take away all discretion and authority from the individual. One reason why Indians do well outside India is that governments outside are often far less intrusive than they are in India. We have an authoritarian governmental system, a colonial system of law in what should be a democracy. And this is a point which Mr. Modi has repeatedly made in both in his conversations and in his speeches, and practically speaking in the state of Gujarat, which he administered for about 13 years, that his idea is minimum government and maximum governance. In other words, unless you minimize government, you cannot maximize governance. And as a result, decision making was handed down to different levels. People were empowered to take decisions throughout, and as a consequence, the people of that state have repeatedly voted back Mr. Modi to power in election after election in the state of Gujarat. Should we replicate the same kind of situation in India? I'm quite confident that in 2019, the next election comes, and the election after that, he's going to win comfortably, assuming, of course, he doesn't retire after 10 years on the job. So this is why it's important that, and I don't differentiate between the people of India or Sri Lanka. We are capable of outstanding effort, but we need systems, processes, and procedures that recognize us, that put the citizen first, that put citizens' rights first. Now, we do a lot of bashing of the United States and the UK and everything, and quite frankly, there's a lot to bash in these countries. I mean, if you Google my name in some of my articles, you'll find an amazing amount of bashing has taken place by me. But the fact that there are certain qualities there which are outstanding. The UK, for example, the concept of freedom, the Magna Carta, the concept of habeas corpus, the concept of human rights, all this was developed in that country 1,000 years ago, almost. Hundreds of years, people have enjoyed a kind of freedom, and it is this freedom, more than a so-called authoritarian system, which led the United Kingdom to take over such large parts of the world. If you look at another context, the war between the Persians and Alexander's Greeks, which you know who won. The Greeks won. One of the explanations for that is that the Persian soldiers were slaves. And it really didn't matter to them whether they were slaves of a Greek or a Persian king, they were still slaves. But the Greeks were free people. They challenged Alexander, they used to abuse him, and there were quite a lot of reasons to abuse him, which I'm not going to go here, because this is a civilized country. But the important point is that freedom is important. And in this, you need an individual who talks in terms of individual freedom, who talks in terms of not allowing controls in the internet. And in India, we have an atrocious law for the internet called the Information Technology Act. I really don't know how that law was passed in Parliament. It makes it illegal for, if you get spam, a certain kind of spam, you can get sent to jail for a few months. If you open that spam, you will definitely get sent to jail for a few months. And if you forward that spam to somebody else, I think I'm going to do that to somebody whom I dislike. Unfortunately, nobody in this place whom I dislike, so no one need worry. I can go to jail for 6 years. This is an absurd law in the age of the internet. India has among the lowest levels of internet penetration in the world. India has the slowest bandwidth in Asia, which obviously means that our bandwidth is way slower than you have in Sri Lanka. And I'd like to say that I know that because I find it's much easier to go online in Sri Lanka than it is in Delhi. So all this had to change, and all this has to change by a person who recognizes that Indians are not inferior people, that India is not a backward country, that if you give them the right mix, the right encouragement, in other words, you don't act as though you're the authoritarian running everything, you act like you're the catalyst, the catalytic factor, that you drop the catalyst in a solution, and in a split second, that solution starts changing and essentially generating and regenerating itself. That is the expectation that we have about Mr. Modi. That expectation is fulfilled in Gujarat, and there is very good objective reason to believe that he's going to fulfill that expectation in the rest of the country. Now, I here basically speak about foreign policy, so I don't, Dr. Swami is a celebrated individual. He can speak on any subject he likes, and he can escape, but I can't. So I'll have to say something about foreign policy. And in this, I'd like to say that after, the entire so-called global architecture that we see in the world has basically been fashioned after the 1945 World War II. This is 2014. It's a very different world from 1945, but this architecture has hardly changed, and on basics, it has remained the same. The architecture basically is, the United States is the dominant factor in this architecture, with Europe as a secondary partner and no other partner. It's the United States and Europe basically determining the architecture and controlling the architecture that is set in place after 1945. Whether it's the IMF, where incidentally China, or the World Bank, China has a lower voting right than the countries in the Benelux. Much smaller economies have low. India, which is a much bigger economy, has got much lower voting right than several countries in Europe for some odd reason. This has not changed since 1945, and it's futile to wait till 2045 for some wisdom to dawn on the individuals controlling these organizations, and so better that you go in with some alternative architecture. Even the United Nations, the Security Council of the United Nations, is the majority of the members, 3 of them belong to a military alliance called NATO, United States, Britain and France. The majority of the 5 belong to one military alliance. So it's not difficult to understand why many of the UN organizations, for example, human rights, there are many parts in the world, frankly, where elections have never taken place, and where not a single complaint has ever come from the United States on the fact that elections have never taken place. I don't see anybody in France or the UK complaining very much about some of the Middle Eastern countries that they'd like to sell defense equipment to, even though it is a fact that there, for example, the Shia population in some of these countries is treated extremely badly. It's treated very, very badly in some of these countries, but not one complaint has come about the maltreatment of the Shia in some communities. But you have a lot of complaints about the maltreatment of Wahhabis in some countries like Iraq, and you have places where arms, equipment, and money have been given, as in Libya. You bomb the place, you save civilians by basically bombing. It's a very unusual way of saving civilians, but we saw that happen in Libya. We are seeing that in Syria. What you're saying is ISIS is basically the money that has come from these states, the training that's come from these states, the weapons that come from these states is today morphed as ISIS and is now threatening security all around the world. The jihadism that is spread in these countries, with the help of these states, those jihadis are now going back to Europe and possibly to the United States and threatening security there. Which is why Prime Minister Modi at the BRICS summit refused to listen to the advice of some people he had been told that you block the BRICS Bank until we can get the headquarters in India. He decided, okay, Shanghai is a good financial capital, we'll do it in the interest of creating a viable new architecture. And the importance of the BRICS Bank is very, very simple. The World Bank and the IMF policy is decided through the prism of the self-interest of the United States and the European Union. So they will impose policies on you which suit them and their companies rather than you and your companies. And you have to either accept it or you don't get your loan. The BRICS Bank will be an alternative to that and will mark a very important change in that. The BRICS Stabilization Fund. You have a large number of currencies being attacked by speculators. We all know in 2008, about $4 trillion of assets was lost by investors in China, India, Japan, the Arab world, and so many other countries through no fault of their own. They were lost because of mismanagement and criminality on the part of bankers in the United States and bankers in Europe. I'd like to say that almost none of these criminals have seen a jail term. They're all sitting happily, enjoying the billions they made, destroying this $4 trillion of the rest of the world. But this is why this kind of a stabilization fund is important, because it prevents, to some extent, speculation in currencies. The rupee has been one of the major factors of speculative currencies. In fact, a small little autobiographical thing, suddenly the rupee value dropped very sharply. I think it was in June to August of last year. Very sharp. Nobody knew what was going on. Some officials met me from some ministries and said, look, there's a group of speculators that are there that are short-selling the rupee based on information they have from the finance ministry and the Reserve Bank that no action is going to be taken to prevent this kind of a slide of the rupee. So they are betting on a sure situation in which they have been assured by the policymakers that nothing is going to be done to protect the rupee. So the only way is to bring this out in the open so they feel nervous. So I wrote an article in the Sunday Guardian about this kind of speculation, and it's a matter of record that the rupee stabilized around the day on which that article appeared. The feedback I got was those speculators got a little nervous that they're going to be exposed, And therefore, that kind of short selling of the rupee, which incidentally Dr. Swami was indulged in by a cabinet minister in the previous government, and I don't want to name the minister here because I'm not in India, but it was a cabinet minister in the previous government doing that short selling stock. This kind of malpractice will be checked through this kind of BRICS fund. And we have a situation in which bankers who commit malpractice pay $10 billion, $8 billion fines in the United States. The same bankers do similar malpractices in India or Sri Lanka or our countries in this region, and they are welcomed by the finance minister, they are welcomed by VIPs, and they are treated, in a very great way, instead of being subject to the kind of $8 billion fines that we should have levied on them, which the American government and the UK government very correctly and wisely levy on them. So this is, in this important multipolar world, clearly Sri Lanka is going to have an honored place. For the simple reason that, especially since President Rajapaksa took office, we have seen a very independent foreign policy on the part of Sri Lanka. In 2009, it's no secret that there was enormous pressure to ensure that one more chance was given to certain individuals who were cornered. That chance was not given despite intense international pressure. And I think it is very, very clear that Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan leadership, and I hope this applies across the Sri Lankan political spectrum, so that others will also learn from President Rajapaksa and follow the same kind of policy. That kind of independence is now coming at a time when there is genuine multipolarity emerging in the world, when there is a genuine effort to ensure that a unipolar kind of focus is not put on the world, and a unipolar kind of punishment is not levied on the world, in which only those who are against a unipolar entity get punished in international fora, and the others, their transgressions get ignored. So that is one very important plus factor for Sri Lanka, your independent foreign policy, your Sri Lanka-oriented foreign policy, and I think this is something which Prime Minister Modi would appreciate, because he has, I think, the same kind of mindset that he will strongly defend the Indian interest and defend the Indian interest against all comers, the way you showed very, very concretely in 2009. The second advantage you have is actually location. Your Indian Ocean is not just the Indian Ocean. I would urge you in the Bandaranaike Institute to stop thinking about the Indian Ocean and start talking about the Indo-Pacific. Because the entire body of water of the Indian and Pacific Oceans is one body of water. Then all the countries of the Indo-Pacific, our linkages are immense with each other. India has way more trade with East Asia, for example, than with South Asia. And East Asia is Pacific. South Asia is Indian Ocean. So the location of Sri Lanka is critical in this Indo-Pacific geopolitics that's emerging. The second is brain power, the immense brain power that you have. And I'd like to say something as an old friend of Sri Lanka, I hope you won't misunderstand me, that your leaders in the mid-1950s did a great disservice to Sri Lanka by downgrading the teaching of English. Had Sri Lanka concentrated on the teaching of English, had you made Sri Lanka a 100% English literate state, today I can tell you, no country in Europe would have been as prosperous as you are today. The information technology revolution, the knowledge revolution, all this depends on a few languages, including English. None of the languages that we speak, regrettably, are still part of that particular pantheon. So it is indispensable to have English. And in the mid-1950s, the downgrading of English was, in my view, a very, very unfortunate decision that was taken, which fortunately is being reversed by the present government. I've been assured by no less than the president himself that he's paying a lot of attention, a lot of focus to English, and I think that's an extremely important point, because with that kind of focus, Sri Lanka can emerge as a knowledge hub. It can emerge as an IT and knowledge hub for the entire Asian region and for other regions as well. Another important resource that Sri Lanka has got, frankly, is Buddhism. You know, Buddhism is there in Japan, it's there in China now. If you go to China today, the most important religion is Buddhist. I mean, I go to China reasonably often, and I find many people in the Communist Party, privately, they say they're Buddhist. And some of them, even though they're senior members, they go to Buddhist temples. So it's an amazingly powerful, soft power asset that Sri Lanka has got. That you are a country which has protected Buddhism at a time when Buddhism has been under threat in different parts of the world. It's a very, very important asset you have, and you're one more asset. And that asset is frankly the population in areas like Jaffna, the population in areas like the north. Now these populations also have immense entrepreneurial spirit. It's been crushed, it's been suppressed for a long time because of the kind of terrorism and other things that have taken place. But today that entrepreneurial spirit has got to come back into play, and this is an immense advantage Sri Lanka has got. So both Tamils and Sinhalese, these are two immense resources that Sri Lanka has got. I'd like to end this by simply saying I have every expectation. In 2006, I predicted that Mr. Narendra Modi will be Prime Minister of India in 10 years. My prediction now, within 2 years, there is going to be a golden period in India-Sri Lanka relations. Thank you.
So, Excellencies and friends, you have heard a lot of challenges in bilateral relationship, what Mr. Modi is going to do back home, globally, regionally. But it seems that my challenge is far greater than that, because I have to speak after the 4 speakers on the same subject. So I think now this challenge is far greater than the other challenges. I am extremely happy back in Sri Lanka, obviously, but also to talk about the issue in which probably for the first time we are seeing a new dynamism in the region, and also the possibilities of doing something far greater than what we could ever imagine. So firstly, on Mr. Modi becoming the Prime Minister, it's the first time, breaking from the past for many reasons that Dr. Swami mentioned, and he said there are many Prime Ministers that are appointed. He's the first Prime Minister who is also appointed, but by the people themselves. And this is an extremely interesting change in the dynamics of how he is going to govern, because he has only one constituency to answer, that is the people themselves. So this could be the first government which could be truly people-centric. Secondly, interestingly, the first time a 3-time Chief Minister has become a Prime Minister. So he realizes all the problems that India faces, because the problems that we face are not in the North Block and the South Block, which is the Ministries of Finance or Home or Foreign Affairs or the Prime Minister's office itself, but these are the challenges which we face actually in the states. So if India has to attain a growth rate of 10%, then all the states must contribute to it. The aggregation of state growth will be the growth rate of India. And that for the first time a Chief Minister becomes a Prime Minister having served the state for 3 consecutive terms, it will be a great change, and therefore we can see a great state-centric development there. In fact, I remember one very interesting slogan Mr. Modi had coined before the election, which nobody believed in, is that he said 272 plus. The 272 is a very magic number that gives a majority in the parliament. So Modi said 272 plus, everybody thought 272 plus for whom? For many parties together. But he himself believed that it is for my own party I am going to get 272 plus. In fact, he far exceeded that number. Now, the people want from him is another promise, that 272 plus was a good promise for you to get elected into the office. Now we want a promise for you while in the office that 10% plus. The India must grow at 10% plus, and to make that happen, this is what Mr. Modi is in office. So again, the Modi is first, in amongst many that has been already cited, is that the first Chief Minister where the performance behind him, but also a lot of promise in him. So this is a great opportunity to manage a performance which gives experience and a promise which gives vision, and that is what people are really looking for. So this is going to be a great opportunity for India under Modi, and we are all looking forward to that. And I'm sure, knowing his track record, knowing him, that he is going to perform far better than what people expected, as he performed far better than what people thought in the election. So I think we should look forward to some very interesting times in next few years' time. Very interestingly, what India needs is what India is capable of doing. India needs to really tap its true potential. And there are several, the BRICS, this slogan BRICS, where did BRICS come from? It was only BCIS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, which was for the Goldman Sachs, which came out with this slogan, which is acronym. And then S was added to be politically correct because Africa should not be excluded. But these BRIC countries have a potential which has actually been identified in very logical terms. So what is India's potential? India could easily be the second largest economy of the world in the next 20-30 years. They are more optimistic among the people who actually make these projections are also feeling it could be the largest economy of the world. But this potential of India cannot be done only through doing these studies in investment banking companies. But it should be done on the ground. And therefore, India's potential to be reached and harnessed in a way that the leadership should be able to do. And I hope Mr. Modi does that, what India is capable of doing. What could be the priority? I just identify one or two of Mr. Modi's government. And this one priority will be a big priority in energy. Modi has actually done that. If you come to India, I was the Minister of Power. So people used to always call me powerful minister. I said, you are sadly mistaken. I am a powerless minister because India doesn't have power. Now the Modi is one of the only states among the 29 that we have now, is the only state where there is no real power cut worth mentioning. And therefore the policy of Modi will be to make that happen at a national level. So energy is going to be a priority for him, along with infrastructure, which again is a great priority. So to do that, there are many areas, and I'll just complete what Sri Lanka and India would work on that. But on talking about Modi's India, as others will see. So one of the first thing that he did, even before he became actually Prime Minister, he took oath of that, was to invite the SAARC leaders. He told not just the SAARC leaders, there was one more country which was present, and that was Mauritius. As you know, Mauritius is not a large economy. Mauritius is of course an Indian Ocean state, but Mauritius has a special significance because it has a large Indian population. So it was sending a signal that irrespective of your size, wherever you are located, we care for you, and therefore you must be present at a time when we are going to celebrate my inauguration in office. And the SAARC countries is a very strong signal that SAARC is not an office which opens once in a year, once in 2 years at the time of summit. That's what the SAARC has become. SAARC is an office which is normally locked, but open only occasionally whenever there are presidents decide to meet together. But unlike that, Modi wanted that SAARC should be like a business house which should really transact business to make people of the region prosper. We should feel very bad that SAARC is a region which always is identified with all types of problems in the world, whether it is related to social development, economic development or otherwise. Why should SAARC be identified with that and should not be the engine of growth? And that's why he invited them, that we have the potential to be the largest economy, and why not we share that prosperity with our neighbors and let us do it together. Was it only symbolic? Yes, but there was a lot of substance in that. I will tell you something. She went and launched one of her rocket, actually a satellite, for scientific purposes. The ISRO, which is the Indian Space Research Organization, he was addressing them and he told them, I want you to launch a SAARC satellite. I want you to launch a satellite which will help all of the SAARC countries, which can benefit them through our natural advantage that we have because we have the expertise, but it should be shared with them. So the vision was not just symbolic in terms of inviting them for inauguration, but this was something which was said even later, and therefore I can see a huge potential in developing this vision through India as a nucleus. Because we always need one large country which can drive the growth. So India could be the growth engine, but not for our own benefit alone, but for the benefit of our neighbors whom we really believe in as our partners. And therefore I think this is a great opportunity for us to do that. And to make that, as I was just saying, Sri Lanka would be one of our great partners in doing this happen. Sri Lanka is a great country, has a great past, great future, and Sri Lanka must address, of course, the challenges that it faces. But while doing that, and talking about Mr. Modi's priority, because it's Modi's India that Mr. Fernando wanted me to talk about, energy is his priority. Let me give an example about SAARC and energy. Bhutan is the smallest state. Incidentally, Modi's first foreign visit was to Bhutan. So it was not to US, it was not to China, but to Bhutan, which is the tiniest place, less than 1 million people. What is Bhutan's uniqueness? India buys hydropower from Bhutan. India invests in the hydropower and buys it from Bhutan. What is the result? Bhutan has the highest per capita income in South Asia. Why? Because India pays royalty to Bhutan and it's a win-win situation. We are investing in infrastructure of Bhutan, we buy electricity from them, Bhutan benefits because Bhutan now can invest that money into human capital development, into development of education and healthcare. Of course, they are already a happy country because with the highest happiness index. But to be happier than this, with this new development. Sri Lanka has the same potential. Sri Lanka's wind potential is as high as 50,000 megawatt or 60,000 megawatt. In fact, if you use new technology, it could be as high as 100,000 megawatt. That is, if you make investment into that, it could be over $150 billion of investment that can go into that. What is $150 billion? Just imagine Sri Lanka's GDP, how many times more it could come only as an FDI into Sri Lanka. And on a regular basis, the amount of royalty that India could pay to Sri Lanka could easily exceed the amount of the budget. That was the World Bank estimate incidentally, that 50 to 60% of GDP would come from the royalties that India would pay to Sri Lanka if they were to buy the power. So this is energy sector, which is the India's priority. So Bhutan is on one side, Sri Lanka here, Nepal. 60-70,000 megawatts of hydroelectricity we can buy from Nepal by making that investment. So just imagine South region will no longer remain a region on which we shall just talk about some ugly thing, but we could talk about something of which we should be genuinely proud of, and that is why what Mr. Modi's India is Modi's vision of this as well. Manufacturing is another great priority for Mr. Modi, and in that context, we have always been talking for a long time. In fact, South Asians are good in talking. I remember I had gone to Yale as a member of parliament leading a delegation. And then there was another delegation which had come from China. So I was asking the dean of Yale, I said, how do you find a difference between our delegation and that delegation? They said there is very one significant difference. Indians talk a lot, Chinese don't talk, take notes. So I think we should really not become a talking club, but club which we act. And to make that happen, I think we should have a great SIPA, which we are talking for a long time. We have been discussing it. So I don't know how many rounds of discussion we must have taken place. In fact, those rounds of discussion were to put a value on it that a lot of trade could happen between the countries. But to make that happen now, I think we should work and move very quickly because India's priority is also manufacturing, and manufacturing will not happen just in India. Once we have a SIPA, Sri Lanka and India will get integrated, and in fact the benefit of that, as a lot of studies have shown, Sri Lanka will be far more benefited, but we are not well about that. Because as long as the region benefits and we work together, it will be a great opportunity. So I think that should be another great thing to happen. And I think just to talk about that energy and manufacturing I just told, Russia signed a deal with China to sell gas to Russia through pipeline. What is the quantum of business? $400 billion is the gas that Russia is going to sell to China, and the only country they could have sold is probably to Russia. The Sri Lanka wind can be only sold to India, because there is no other country which can buy the wind potential. And even if Sri Lanka were to absorb all the wind potential, and that they should do in any case, because as a friend of India, I always say that Sri Lanka has the first right over it. But after doing that, when the asset is created here, Sri Lanka can always use it, but that's a great potential. And therefore, I think we have a great opportunity. Many people have mentioned about tourism. India sends largest tourists to Sri Lanka. Of course, India has this great distinction, dubious, I would say. India's outbound tourists are more than inbound tourists. So therefore we always travel more, like 5% travel. But I think we should try to get those tourists, not just from India, but we could develop a common tourism circuit in which people from other parts of the world could visit India and Sri Lanka together, because they will get a variety, they will get some benefit of seeing that, and the cost may not be as high. So therefore we should work on that. And my last point is that we should learn from each other. One of the great things that we should learn from Sri Lanka is the Human Development Index. Under the UNDP Human Development Index, Sri Lanka stands much, much higher than India. In fact, only one parameter, life expectancy at birth. Sri Lanka is more than 76 and we are 65, 66. So just imagine how much we can learn from you in terms of how Human Development Index should do it. Probably Sri Lanka can also learn, because we have to learn from each other. That's how to devolve in terms of democratic processes. Like we are given the 73rd Amendment, 74th Amendment, given a lot of power to local self-government, and as a consequence we are seeing that even the increase in the percentage of voting which went to 85-90% in some states, This happened because people felt that I am very close to the government because this is the government I feel. That nobody can go and meet the chief minister, the prime minister, or the MLA, but they can meet a local government. So local governments are important, and I think that's something which we can put together. So I see a great, interesting times ahead. Mr. Modi had given a slogan that good days will come. अच्छे दिन आएंगे. So I had written an article on that in Economic Times saying that अच्छे दिन for people अच्छे दिन will come little later, but SARC अच्छे दिन already come. And I think therefore I genuinely feel it's a great opportunity. Let us seize this moment of history with both our hands to make sure that India, Sri Lanka, SARC countries and the region really benefit from each other and benefit in a way that we write history and do not bother about past all the time. Past is a reality, history is something which we can shape together, and to make that happen, what we really need is a collaborative effort. And I'm sure this small little event for which Mr. Fernando has invited all of us and all of you are present here would go a long way in forging that relationship. It's the first step, and I'm sure we are moving toward a destination. Thank you very much.
In India. However, this philosophy or the so-called background of 2001 riots and this prediction of this non-connection authorities. So what is the future of secularism? You tell us who should answer.
Yes. I think it will be helpful to if you give an indication as to
So who should
answer, maybe
any of the candidates.
Well, you see, I think one of the problems with your question is that secularism wasn't an issue in the debate, in the entire election. The future of India as a multi-religious country wasn't debated, except in some newspapers. I never heard it being discussed in any of some media channels. I never heard it being discussed on the field. The misconceptions sting because some people believe that there is something called one fixed idea of India, which is codified, defined, and from which you cannot deviate. The future of Indian secularism wasn't guaranteed by the mere fact that in the height of the emergency, the term secular was inserted into the preamble of the Constitution. It was guaranteed by the mere cultural ethos of the country, whereby it is recognized that there are various religions and faiths which inhabit country, and nobody has a monopoly of the truth. And as long as that is there, secularism is there. But there is a secularism which believes that you can use the term to frighten minorities into voting in one direction. I think what this election did was that it shattered that belief that someone can have a permanent veto over an election outcome. To that extent, I think those who attach that belief in secularism, that idiom of secularism, I think was certainly compromised by this election result.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. Just coming over from Kathmandu actually after meeting there, when the whole emphasis was, of course, very much so on the fact that Prime Minister Modi's special emphasis that was given to SARC as against other aspects was the main aspect. And the theme of that conference, in which all South Asians are participating, was, of course, it was called the whole question of the South Asian vision. Now, the South Asian vision is sometimes seen as a mad dream which cannot take place. And right through in this discussion, the focus was really on South Asia. But one unfortunate thing was that there were one or two, including myself, who looked at the need for South Asia also to open up a little bit more and look at, for example, what is being pushed by the Chinese, which is called the Asian century. Now, really, it's a slightly larger aspect than purely a South Asian one. So would you say, many of you say that one should sort of concentrate excessively on purely the whole question of a South Asian rise, rather than taking it in terms of a larger thing, taking it in the Asian century, or even beyond that? If you look at, say, what took place in Brazil, where you have for the first time Indians as India and China together as representing Asia, and all the other things as well. So in this globalization situation, how would you see the South Asians reacting too much by themselves, or to open up much more to the other Asian countries, including of course Southeast Asia and so on, China, and even the larger focus than that? Thank you.
Well, first of all, you see the